Hello, welcome. Next up is Sucrose. So we're going to be talking about our catalyst animations here. I believe Sucrose, out of all the characters, let's see, what was it was who was the Claymore user last time? Her name was Noelle, who was kind of like, a maid that wants to be a soldier, a maid that wants to be a fighter. Sucrose comes across in terms of personality as being kind of similar in a lot of ways. Someone who's very, very shy, a little bit easily frightened, and I guess also intelligent. Someone who takes pride in their studies and their knowledge, but in real life experience out on the field and doing all these things sometimes is a little bit more reserved, right? In these cases, so I think in this situation it's actually quite interesting for her case because compared to Noelle, Noelle has to carry a very large blade. So a lot of times it's about how she's holding the blade and how she moves with the blade that communicates her character. But for Sucrose, she's not bound to holding a physical object. So her hands are very free to do whatever they want. And in Magic, you use your hands to cast something, things happen. But then after that's happened, you're allowed to do anything you want. So if you're cool, you can hold the pose. If you're impatient, you can just quickly revert back to something and then just forget it. If you're someone that likes to be very, very, someone who likes flourishing or just like, show off, then you'll do a lot of extra things that are not necessary but kind of may look cool. I think for Sucrose, the first thing that happens is anything she does is it always has the after effect of, oh my god, I'm sorry, right? Like in that capacity. If we look at the very first animation, most of the time, a lot of the times, her face is always down. It is never directly at what she's doing. And that's one way to communicate sort of just shyness or just like a version of looking at what you're doing or the thing that you're trying to hit or whatever. Because confidence a lot of times sometimes comes from eye contact. If you're talking to someone, eye contact is very, very important to sort of convey that you're comfortable and that you're focused on this person. A lot of times when you're shy and you revert back into yourself, you have a lot more of these closed off tendencies. And in terms of posing, a lot of times your head, if you want, your eyes will avert from the thing present and you'll just like prefer being to yourself, right? So Sucrose, a lot of times her face is always down. It's like right here, she's not looking at the thing. And it's interesting too, because Mona, when she throws out, does these like powerful forward motions and then open and stuff, right? And then Sucrose, on the other hand, whoop, she like flicks it out and then brings her hand back in as if like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry. Or like she's a little bit too scared to reach out of her bubble, right? But at the same time, she still has a lot of nice follow through, right? Like when she does this, you have a very nice arc here. Her fingers are trailing right here. Very, very nice. And again, the same thing. Her upper body and her root are leading first. Then her hand goes through. Boom. She holds in. Boom. Like her antics are still very, very well purposed and strong as someone who needs to cast, right? In terms of timing and spacing and stuff, they're still very similar and they all follow a specific rule set for most of the casters. Boom. But same thing here. You can't see it in the front view, but you can see on the side view. She has her hand out and she's casting her blast out, but at the same time she's trying to protect herself by holding her, closing off her chest. She's like protecting herself while also attacking someone, right? And then that same thing, she's facing downwards here, right? She's still scared of directly confronting you, right? And there's also this element of like, we talked about having straights and bends on like legs and stuff all the time, but you can see here that a lot of her poses are still bent. Her knees are always bent and they're always facing inwards. There's two ways of, I guess, approaching sort of like bent legs, which is one, it's like they can be very, very strong and alpha or very confident, but at the same time, in certain cases, they can be communicative of like uncertainty, right? If your knees are very close and if their knees are shaking, if you're not really leaning towards a strong stance versus like a very straight stance, if you're not leaning towards either, then that sort of communicates uncertainty and in the middle. And then this one, so she has a spin, just like Mona. Woo! But again, again, it's the same thing. She's putting some effort into it, but she's not really putting that much effort into it. Like she just like, here, I'll just send it to you a little bit. Her hands here. There's a common hand pose here where Mona, for example, open, very, very powerful and strong, like straight lines everywhere, right? But for Sucrose on her hand here, it's the typical like the bent wrist, and then you have like your fist and your hand like clenched a little bit, just to like, I don't know. I'm not sure how to explain that term or anything, but it is just one of those things that I think people read pretty easily in those cases. And there's another example where this time she uses 2 hands, poof. But again, she doesn't hold that pose very long. She just goes straight through it and then brings them closer into herself because she's a little bit like, oh, I didn't mean to do something so powerful. You can also tell that she closes her eyes for everything. Very nervous. But same thing. Animations are still great. Maybe here you have your flash frame, so you want your hands to be here. But I think in this situation, maybe we can make it more powerful by having her body a little bit lower. Again, though, maybe we want to make it feel weak, right? Because Sucrose is that character that feels like she's very powerful in actuality, but in terms of character, she's not confident in herself. So perhaps really strong breakdowns and really strong poses, you don't necessarily need it here, right? Hand here, you have delay, you have drag happening right here. Boom. Look right here. Happening with the hands. So you can see here that the hands, at least for example, the hand palms are facing forward. The hand palms are probably facing forward here, but as soon as they come here, they're rotating inwards. So the palms are facing inwards. The outside of the hand are facing outwards, and then back here, they've reversed. So that's just a small detail, but I think the idea here is that you're always having this shape of flow first this way into this, and as long as you maintain that kind of view, it feels really nice. The same thing here. You have a spin, and then she's, instead of here where she's, if you ask her, hey Sucrose, can you like hold that pose a little bit longer? Can you just like put more oomph into it? We talked about this a little bit too with Klee. This one's more powerful, and so she gets pushed back here. So from a physicality perspective, you can already tell that she's traveling in this direction, poof, and slides. And when she does it, she's like, okay, powerful, ah! But she holds it, she follows through. But you know, again, she's not doing something where she's like leg out, like leg straight out, and then hands out like this and facing forward to be like, yeah, I pushed this, I blasted forward. In this case, she's still hiding her face, right? Because she doesn't. Still nervous about her thing. Ooh, that's different. Is that different? I feel like that's slightly different. Nope. I am seeing things. It is the exact same. Another example. It's funny. Basically, all these examples is basically just do a cast and then have a reaction afterwards. As well as like maybe, for example, if the pose does hold out, change the pose a little bit to have a cocked a bent wrist, hands closed, usually never open, elbows in, maybe hands close to the chest, eyes averting, head averting, maybe eyes closed, all these different things. Just layer that into the poses and you're good to go. And this one for Q, for her ult, this is almost like a Klee thing. Klee does this thing where she grabs something and throws it up. It's basically like a Klee. Woo! But then right here, whoa, she's happy. Boom. Then she's nervous. Instead of Klee, who relishes in all these explosions and stuff, it seems like for Sucrose, she's a little bit more like, I don't want to see. I'm a little bit too scared of what I threw out and what's going to happen. And then theoretically in this situation, she checks. She's like, oh, okay. But basically, big butterfly of wind is just tearing up the field, throwing everyone in the sky. Cool. That was all very cute. I think this is very interesting because the conversations that we're having right here, I think, for these Catalyst users mainly revolves around, for example, like we were talking a lot about weight and claymores and stuff last weekend. And there's a lot to sort of discuss about sort of like the mechanics of animation because that's very important, right? Animation, I think one of the biggest concepts that we have to encounter is learning how to convey weight and learning how to sort of animate with that in mind, right? Because that's something that, you know, we don't get for free. In real life, weight and gravity and center of mass, that all just happens as part of our real life system. But in animation, in Maya or in Blender, unless you're simming something, you don't get that. So we as animators have to sort of figure out, understand how does that work and how do we communicate that. What's interesting about all these Catalyst users this week, though, is that they don't have a weapon that offsets their character. So in the end, mainly a lot of the stuff that we're talking about isn't really weight related because all these characters are all, well, first off, they're all female. And they're just basically they're just jumping around, spinning, and throwing their arms around. Like the magic that they're casting doesn't necessarily have very much weight to necessarily consider, if we're being perfectly honest. But I find that all very, very fascinating. All right, we are sort of almost halfway through. We're going to be talking about Barbara next.